Okay, class, should be Wednesday, April 15th, day 3 of our Civil Rights Unit. I promise that today will be quicker. I only have 4 notes today. I heard from a class during their meeting time that they were playing me at 1.5 speed because I wouldn't get to the point. Rude. Um, this is important stuff. I just feel like we really have to talk this out, and none of you are here to directly talk to me about it, but it was nice to touch base with a few classes already this week. And I'm with each class for half an hour every day between 10 and 10:30. We can either take questions on the Google Classroom format or I could set up a Zoom. But either way, since I feel like I have to move it along now, wanted to remind you that we have a document of the week due by the start of your class on Friday. These are time stamped. So if especially if you're trying to get in that optional makeup document of the week, you want it to count, it's got to be time stamped by the start of your class. We have very few notes today. And now Mr. Talbot is calling. Let's see if we can pause and still record. Yes, class, it was Mr. Talbot. He apologizes for interrupting and has this inspirational message for you.
Yeah, well, this is the time to learn all the social studies you can, as we hope our country stays together following this year's election. So learn while you can, kids.
Good grief, that was dark. All right, I'm cutting him out. Okay. Well, what was a second for you was like an hour, hour and a half for me. I don't know what time it said down here in the corner when I left, but either way, hopefully I don't repeat myself too much. But like I said, it's been an hour or an hour and a half in my time. But only 4 notes today. Let's get to it. Let's start reviewing some of this material. And yes, Mr. Talbot is crazy. Okay, today we are on the same objective that we were on yesterday. We had already covered the civil rights movement, the change in strategy of the 50s. We had already covered the 2 court cases. And yesterday we started to talk about how and why passive resistance or civil disobedience works. So we're on that objective again today. And if we look at our notes, I did want to go back and remind you of all the things that we have already covered. Again, we've done now officially several of these terms. Brown versus Board, whoops, Brown versus Board, not bilingual education. We have done boycott. We have done civil disobedience. We have done the Little Rock Nine and Plessy versus Ferguson. So those 5 terms are already covered in the first couple days. If we go through this first page of notes, again, if you missed this, this is on the day 1 recording. That's pretty straightforward stuff. I wanted to see if you saw Edgar. I guess that's going to be on this page when I introduce you to the Little Rock Nine. I did have some honor students who told me that they found Edgar. If you did not see Edgar, Edgar is right there. That is tough to see. You can only see sort of his mouth and hair. Um, so I put a link there to the reward video for being so eagle-eyed and catching Edgar. Okay. The formative review that you did yesterday, I'm getting good numbers of responses here. Let's go over these answers. I know you can go over them simply by turning that in. It'll give you that feedback. But of course, what was boycotted in Montgomery was bus service. What group of students bravely desegregated Little Rock High School? It's the Little Rock Nine. What best describes in general the South's reaction to desegregation? Strong resistance. In what case overturned Plessy versus Ferguson? It's Brown versus Board. And that's so important because one, it gives you a legal standing for desegregation, and two, it sort of gets the momentum, the ball rolling for all of these other advancements. And one of the big techniques or strategies that people used to continue the movement forward was passive resistance or civil disobedience. So these 2 reasons here of why we do civil disobedience, because it creates empathy for the cause, because it highlights the violence of the oppressor, the that's going to be all over this test. We're going to have a test in, I don't know, I'm going to guess 3 weeks, and that test is every version of that test is going to highlight that because that's just how important I think that is. Dr. King had modified things he learned in his uh, theological studies from Gandhi, and he very much was savvy to how to use the modern media to demonstrate what was going on and not allow racists to be able to reframe it because if you are not fighting back, there's no way you can just show, say, the end of something without the cause of something. And so he very effectively teaches people how to create empathy for the cause and highlight the violence of the oppressor. So this is your first new note for today. And again, there's only four things you have to write in today. And the first one is right here with sit-ins. So sit-ins accidentally grew out of this nonviolence concept. And I say accidentally. If you really dive into the studies, you will see there are examples of sit ins before this 1960 event. But essentially, they were sporadic. What happens in 1960 is four students sort of accidentally fall into the sit in concept, and then it spreads like wildfire across the South. So, what's a sit in? Well, four young men, all college students, had attended some SCLC training, Southern Christian Leadership Conference training, where they're learning about the methodologies from Dr. King. And they were from North Carolina. I can't remember which North Carolina university, but they were from a university in North Carolina. And on their way home from this training, they went to a restaurant that had segregated seating. And these four men, that's not the greatest picture, but you can start to see it there. These four men were told by their waitress, who happened to be African American, said, "Hey, don't cause trouble for me, please. Can you sit over here in this segregated section?" And they, having been taught the methodology of civil disobedience, said, "No, we're not going to move. That's an immoral law. Why should people have to sit somewhere else because of the color of their skin?" So they simply refused. Now, again, thinking about civil disobedience, thinking about how to break an immoral law in a way that focuses the attention on how insane the law is as opposed to their actions. Those four men sit there, they have money to pay for their food, they are willing to simply just be served there, eat, and go. If anyone's going to make a big deal out of it, it's going to be the restaurant for refusing to serve them. They do refuse to serve them. They call the police. And when the police show up to arrest them, and again, they're not using any profanity, they're actually being perfect gentlemen. They are simply saying, "We are here to eat. It is only right. We have the money to pay for the meal. We are not moving until we are given our meal. And we're not going to move to some other section because of something as ridiculous as the color of your skin." So this is where it's happening. And the police show up to arrest them, and they are not going to flinch their arm away or in any way fight the police, but they're also not going to help them. They just simply say, "You'll have to carry us out." And so it ends up being like a big headache for the police because they've got to literally pick up these men. Now, what happens is when these men get back to their university and they tell all their friends about what happened, black and white students who are just blown away that this would happen then show up at this restaurant, except now instead of four, it's dozens, and the next day it's 100, and so on and so forth, and they just fill up this restaurant. And then when the police get called, it takes the police hours because they literally have to carry everybody out. Again, you've got to remember, passive resistance says you're not going to do anything to make it appear as if you're fighting the police because you're not. But you're also not going to walk out with the police. You're simply just going to sit in your seat and be carried away, which is going to be time consuming. And while all that's taking place, and you've got, say, 100 protesters who have to be carried out one by the police, that restaurant's losing money. And so, what do you think happens? That restaurant finally, and let's be real, not because they realize they're wrong, but they finally, because they're losing too much money, say, "Okay, we're just going to desegregate because it's not worth fighting you for this." And so those college students take that same strategy and they apply it to other restaurants and other facilities. And within 6 months, virtually everything in North Carolina was desegregated. That is amazing. That is taking those concepts learned from Dr. King and applying them in a real life situation to create the sit in. The counter that these four gentlemen sat at has been placed in the Smithsonian. So this is a picture I took when I visited the Smithsonian. Um, I want you to notice, I don't know who these kids are, but this kid here is looking over towards us. And that's because I was so enamored that this display was there, that this was the actual counter. And you know what a history nerd I am, that I reached over and touched this chair just to touch that piece of history. But you're really not supposed to touch historical displays. So there was an employee who kind of, I'll say, gently yelled at me, but did definitely raise their voice. And when I got yelled at, this kid turned around and looked, and my family was embarrassed. But I got to touch the actual seats that people use for the first real modern sit-in. Yep, I'm a nerd. So, ladies and gentlemen, this methodology then starts to spread throughout the South, and Dr. King comes to the realization that young people are great soldiers for this movement. They are impassioned, they care, and generally speaking, right around that age between 18 to 22 is, a time when you probably have some pretty strong beliefs and want to express them. And so he uses the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, to focus on teaching young people. And eventually, what he ends up doing is creating a separate group from within the SCLC called SNCC. Now, everybody called it SNCC. He didn't. He called it the SNCC, but people like to make words out of things, and that's for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And essentially, what this was a group specifically dedicated to teaching nonviolent passive civil disobedience to college kids. So the SCLC could be more broad based, and SNCC was more about college students, which often, again, not the only, but a big portion of the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement. And so SNCC really had so many activities where they're teaching kids about why they're doing this, how it creates empathy for the cause, how it highlights violence to the oppressor, and they come up with their own strategies, like when kids get arrested for things they should never get arrested for, like sitting in a restaurant, white and black patrons together, they get arrested. Well, when they get arrested, early on, people bailed them out, of course. And that's when college kids started saying, you know what? When you bail us out, you have to post all this money. We should save our money, and while we're doing it, waste the money of the communities that are arresting us for really things that shouldn't be crimes by sitting in jail. So they promoted this slogan that was, again, almost all SNCC, not SCLC, and this idea of jail, no bail. So if you arrest them, they're like, fine, we'll sit in jail and we'll eat 3 meals a day and we'll fill up your jail with a bunch of non-violent, non-criminals. And your jail can just then not be used for real crime. And you can lose all this money feeding us. And what would happen in many of these southern communities is these jails would fill up and they would eventually go, I guess we're going to let them go. And then they stopped arresting them for doing things like this. Now, that's not across the board. Some communities like Birmingham were so racist, they built more jails, which is insane to think about. But as Jail No Bail does the same thing. It brings sympathy or empathy to the cause and highlights the violence of the oppressor, because you go, what are these kids in jail for? Oh, they sat down to have a cup of coffee with a white friend. Oh, sure. Yeah, that in bizarro world makes sense. So it really does the job. Your last note for today. You started to see more cooperation with other groups. And the National Urban League worked with the NAACP and the SCLC and the Congress of Racial Equality. And you have a lot of different groups going, okay, we see what's working here. This is good stuff. This is bringing about change and bringing about uh, an effective solution here. And so this is how the movement is really moving along by the late 50s, early 60s. Okay, those are all your notes. So today, much less lecture, with a nice cameo by Mr. Talbot in the middle. I'm going to put next to this link the section 2 formative. And so again, that's going to be quote unquote graded, but it's not really graded. It just gives you that feedback. But I'm also going to link to a review worksheet. Now for honors, it's complete. It's voluntary. It's not going to be graded for you. For non-honors, this is a graded worksheet. I think you're going to find it very easy. It's going to help boost that third quarter grade. So go ahead and when you feel like you know the material, click on that, and you're just going to have 10 questions. Some you have to write in, some that you have to click the right answer, and we'll have that feedback from that. Later on this week, we're going to remember your document of the week is due by Friday. We'll do dumb laws, dumb crooks, and at some point, either late this week or early next week, we're going to talk about the assassination of JFK, and we're going to do a little reenactment. So you'll have a silly video that I have to figure out yet how I'm going to put together. So that is about it for me today. Please get a chance, if you get a chance, do that worksheet. And I hope everybody out there stays safe. See you guys.